So, a still image sequence. The main thing, because I know I have tons of these lying around. Interesting. This is a look at, actually, randomly, because I'm giving a talk on how I made this film on Thursday at After Effects in New York. A good look at how I organize a project. Started with a whole bunch of random crap, different experiments, like my first directory, 3D models that I ended up not using. Import that. Textures, sound effects, Flash files, because this was animated in Flash by hand, and more textures, storyboards, budget, narration.
Take a screenshot of that folder.
Which folder? Oh yeah. Which one?
This one right here. All the things that we're going to do.
Well, there really isn't anything that's general, right? But we can do that.
Find organizing in the past.
Right. Yeah.
Organizing.
Yeah. Yeah, so organizing as you go. Like, and this is actually only part of the project. Like after this, here's the render. Here are all the frames I exported from Flash. Right. Here are the frames after I ran them through Photoshop to roughen them up. Here are the After Effects projects. That's a preview. Oh, thanks. I inadvertently caught this. I'm missing the final render. At one point, I had 4 different treatments, so I tried 4 separate. And I think I showed you this on the first day of class, the finished version. Anyway, so that's how I've organized all this. I was just looking for a image sequence, though. Okay, so here we go with importing an image sequence. Most of what you'll do in creative coding, right, you'll be rendering image sequences out. So this will be really useful for a lot of different applications. So I'm going into that presentations folder, and here are those images. So click on the first image in your sequence, although I think you can actually click on any. And this is the magic checkbox here, PNG sequence. If you do this, you'll import. Look, I just imported all 1,500 images here. They can be any image sequence that it read. You know, Targa, TIFF. What did you say? Oh, I made it. It came out of Flash.
Oh, you made it in Flash.
Yeah. Right. But you could do, these can be generated from processing. You could, if you for some reason exported, this could be a bunch of still camera photos, you're doing animation frame by frame. These could be, and there's one more step, which is notice that this says 30 frames per second. You can, in the preferences, if you are usually going to be in import, sequence footage, 24 frames per second, you can set a default. Right? So that's in preferences, import. So if I delete this, if I do it again, here I am, PNG sequence. And this checkbox is just whatever you did last. If you unchecked it, it'll be unchecked. And here we are, and now, look, there are 24, which is usually what you want. But if you want to change this, and this is really useful, because this is one of those things you use all the time, and it's buried like several menus deep. File, interpret footage, main. And that is the stupidest name, main. Like, seriously, this is a menu. Why is it main? I mean, it's about changing the frame rate of a piece of footage. I don't understand. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the other option part from main?
Exactly.
Have you ever used the other option?
But this is where you change the frame rate, because remember, unlike a QuickTime movie has a bit of data in it, a flag that says I am 30 frames per second, I am 2997, I am this, I am that. Images is just a bunch of images. So it doesn't know what the frame rate is until you tell it. So that's how you tell it what the frame rate is. If I wanted to say this is 12, interpret footage, and the keyboard shortcut is Command Option G. So 12, and now it thinks it's 12. But look at the difference in time. I'm going to drag this to a comp by dragging it onto that button. Remember that when we do this, that's exactly the same as saying composition, new composition, matching the settings. That's what's so beautiful about this otherwise annoyingly obscure looking little button, is that when you drag this to here, it automatically creates a new comp of that length. And look, when this is set to 12 frames per second, here we have a comp. It's 12 frames per second. And okay, I have in project settings, you can change what that timeline display is. I'm going to say time code and not frames. Although actually frames is useful because if you're doing animation, it lets you count how many actual images any given shot is. So here, and here let me reset this to standard because we're only using one monitor. There we go. So here at 12 frames per second, this image sequence is 2 minutes 11 seconds. If I'm going to delete this comp and I'm going to use interpret footage, Command Option G, I'm going to make it 24, drag it into a new comp. Now it's half the length, 105. What was it originally? Well, unless you know, we have no way of telling, right? It's just an image sequence. That's one of the trickiest things. If you're generating material at a certain frame rate, like out of processing, out of Flash, know what your frame rate was, because there's no way to... I actually will often, I don't think I did it here, I will often put a text file with an image sequence if it's something really important and I'm going to be leaving it alone for a while that says this was generated at whatever. I happen to know that this was done at 12 frames per second. So I'm going to drag this in here, and that's the correct length, and that's actually the length of the film. So that's how you use an image sequence. I really recommend working that way. Like processing has a lot of trouble generating QuickTime movies, I've found. It's a lot easier, I think, to work with still images and then assemble a QuickTime movie out of a program that was designed for that, like After Effects. 3D programs pretty much work exclusively in image sequences. At least I think Maya has complained. It's supposed to support QuickTime movies, but I've had a lot of trouble rendering QuickTime movies out of Maya as well. So a lot of animation software, you'll be rendering image sequences out of it and then assembling them in just this way. So in fact, a quick way, right? I mean, now that I've done this, starting from scratch, a quick way to assemble a bunch of images into a movie using After Effects. You can import them, set them to the correct frame rate. In this case, it's 12. Drag it to here. Drag it to the new comp, and then Command Control M to make it put it in the render queue, and then you're ready to render out a whole QuickTime clip out of your movies. But let's get There we go. Let's get a background going here. So I'm going to make a new HD comp. And I'm going to rotate this. And notice how even a pretty hefty 2.5K JPEG image, this was taken with like a point and shoot, Canon point and shoot. Look, even a fairly hefty image, it's a little too small for HD. Like backgrounds in HD, like the bigger the better. Like if you shoot it on a 5D, like an 18 megapixel image, that's still what is it? That's still just like 4,000 on a side or so. Fortunately, you can often blur out a background if you're stuck with one. Usually, you're looking at something in the foreground, so you can put a little blur on a background that you're scaling up, so that it won't be. Yeah.
When you work on backgrounds,
Mhm.
like I've heard of this technique. I've never used it, so I'm wondering if you agree with it. Of painting what the camera sees
Mhm.
on a canvas,
Mm.
and then drawing or acquiring footage for the background according to what the camera in your movie saw. Like, suppose you just did a proxy, and then you plotted the motion of the field of view and just built for that. Did you use that? Do you know of it being used?
I know photogrammetry, when you like take pictures of stuff in 2D, take pictures of an environment, and then project those textures into 3D objects that are roughly made in the same shape. But about actually hand painting.
No, not that. It's just like, suppose you're sketching a movie, and there's like actors in the foreground, the camera is moving because you've already kind of set up the scene. This is all in After Effects or whatever, in any kind of animation program. And you haven't figured out the backgrounds yet. You're going to paint them later or acquire footage of them later. And you need to figure out how much background you need to build.
That sounds like a good plan. I mean, I usually build the backgrounds, drop them into the shot, and kind of figure out where things will land afterwards. I just make a really big, high-resolution background. But I guess that makes sense as a way to cut down on what you have to create. You know, if you already know what all your shots are.
No,
I don't.
I'm asking like
Well,
for
yeah.
I guess news. You start with the background or start with the actor?
With a shot? Oh, with a shot. It really depends on your planning. Like, definitely I would at least start with storyboards, right? And I'd start with an animatic. It's usually only when you put the storyboards together on your timeline and begin to see the shots in relation to each other in time that you begin to be able to make decisions like, oh, wow, these 7 shots share the same background. So that's the spreadsheet, and we'll go over this in the future. Like that's where planning can come into it, where once you have all of your once you have your animatic together, and you begin looking at your shots and thinking, okay, well, 7 of these share the same background, so maybe I have 100 shots, but need only a dozen backgrounds for all of them. And to make them really big, you can often also reuse the same background for different shots. Sometimes even completely different shots if you just need a corner of something or very blurred out. But I just want to get through this. Oh, this was just as a side note. Here are some puppets that I've been working on for something that are built of many different pieces in Photoshop. And these, it's a constant battle to remember how much you need. These I built. These are 2K images, but unfortunately, I just realized I need it too late. I need some close-ups, which means I'm probably going to have to repaint these in 4K. Like blow them up and then draw on them some more to cover up the artifacting. Because yeah, it's really unforgiving. Tends to be. The one good thing is so you have a blink layer, you have pupils. Yeah. So much personality in eyes.
Does it help to work in Illustrator, or does it make a difference?
If you work in Illustrator, then you're free of all this because you can export at any resolution. If you later decide you need 4K, just export higher res graphics, or bring in the Illustrator graphics directly with continuous the continuous rasterized button checked, and it'll always re-render vector. So yeah, that's one way of getting around it. If you have a style that will fit with the clean vector lines, or the new Illustrator brushes are pretty good too for sort of a more organic look. Okay, so we'll look at the classes, the class example, meaning like using classes and crossing. We'll look at that next time. Bring on time, but so I'm going to create a camera, and I'm going to make this 3D. And I'll put a bulge effect on this, distort. And so you'll want the horizontal radius to be a lot bigger. And you want it to taper off, so it's not a harsh circle. You may want to mess around. You probably want the bulge height to be negative because we perceive the world curving slightly away from us with distance. So now you've got this, and I've chosen a poor example really because that sign, the walk sign, is really right in the foreground of the image. So it, in real life, it wouldn't distort much. But let's meaning the sky would, but the foreground image would probably look pretty flat to us. But let's do something extreme just so this becomes more visible. So, and what you can do is, I'm going to hit E for effects. Remember, one of the simplest things you can do with expressions without typing any code at all is just establish relationships between properties. So what if I tie the bulge center to the point of interest, like where the camera is looking? And this isn't going to work right away because we will need to write a little code to massage this. But right away you can see, and I'm going to turn 3D off on this layer, that as we move the camera around, the image distorts. Right? I'm no longer moving the center, but we'll need to work on this. The problem here is that the point of interest is a 3D point, and the bulge center is a 2D point. So var x equals zero. Var y equals, oops, 1, and then var z equals 0, and then return x, y, z. Oh, just x and y. We don't need the, in this case, we don't need the z-axis. And then we'll need to this dot width divided by 2 minus height divided by 2. Or is it plus? There we go. And I've said I made this kind of extreme. And it looks like we're moving in reverse here. So we'll probably need absolute this comp width minus Huh. This comp dot height. Point of interest 1. We've clearly reversed our axes here. There's Dan Eberts again. This name will come up a lot. Math.atoms. Well, I will leave us with this for today. If you're doing this for real, you could, because it seems to have fixed itself. If you're doing this for real, you might want a much larger value for the radius and a less exaggerated value for the height. Something more like this. And then once again, anything in the foreground of an image like this, to look, if you wanted greater realism, you'd probably be better served by cutting that out. The sign wouldn't distort very much from a near view. There's also, there's a panorama track in particular. Okay, so form your groups. You got that. You actually, it's sort of a deceptively, and I'll upload this project as well. So you've got a deceptively tough assignment, right? I mean, you're not making it a little exercise, but you have to, decide who you'll be working with, decide what you'll be working on, and come next week ready to show and talk about it. And from here on out, you're really going to be determining the direction of what we do. Like, so next time, those of you who want to do boot camp, do that, or there's plenty to mess around with if you're not specifically interested in scanning or motion capture for 3D CG. There's plenty you can do just with Maya and the Mac. We'll work with that. We'll look at that next time. And we'll also look at classes in processing for creating particles. Will also be a really useful, a useful tool to have. Cool. So I'll be around for a bit if anyone's got any questions.
There's this